this video, my trusty It mug is making an appearance because this is my first Stephen King video. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing great. My name is Chloe. If you're new to this channel, then make sure you click subscribe and click the bell button if you would like to get notifications every time I post a video. I usually post a video twice a week on Wednesday and Saturday at 11 AM GMT. For today's video, I thought that I would do my first Stephen King video. I'm thinking of doing quite a few videos about Stephen King's books because he is the author that I've read the most work from. So this first video is sort of going to be an introductory video. It's just going to be a video about which books I have read from him. I'm not going to go into too much depth because I think there's about 15 books on this list. And I tried to make a list of these books in order of when I've read them, but it was a bit difficult because I actually started reading Stephen King's books before I had a Goodreads account, so it's hard to track when I read each book in comparison to each other. But also, there's some books that I think I haven't even put into Goodreads that I know for a fact I have read. I'm not going to give ratings for these books because I would much rather do individual videos about either singular books or about my favourite books or about my least favourite books. So if you guys want more Stephen King videos or have any ideas for what sort of videos I can make to do with his books, then make sure to comment them down below or send me a DM on Instagram if that's what you prefer. I will leave my Instagram down in the description box as always, along with my Goodreads. I know for a fact what the first Stephen King book I ever read was, and I'm not gonna lie, this is 100% because I saw the film before I read the book. I saw the 2017 adaptation of It and I absolutely loved the film, so therefore I really wanted to read the book. I was mostly motivated to pick up this book by the character development and the relationships between the children in the film, so I thought it'd be really interesting to see where the film had taken inspiration from, so therefore I really wanted to read the book. Obviously I knew who Stephen King was before, but I had never really thought of picking up any of his books, and I think I would have been about 16 at the time. Here is my lovely beaten up copy of It. As you can see, it's the movie version. It was the cheapest one that I could get on Amazon. I really enjoyed it the first time, I read it the second time, I really enjoyed it. The thing is, even though I really enjoy it, it still took me about a month to read each time. But yeah, that's the first Stephen King book I ever read, and this is what really made me want to pick up even more Stephen King. So I think I read this, it would have been around October time, because I think that was roughly like September, October, that was when the film came out. And then I got this as soon as I could possibly do it, and then the same year for Christmas I asked for some Stephen King books, which obviously will come up on this list. That year for Christmas I think I got 3 Stephen King books, and they are most likely the 3 books that I then read afterwards. One of them that I remember getting was another of Stephen King's massive books, and this is one of his, I guess, epic books, and that is The Stand. All I remember is that it took a long time, but I really enjoyed it, I'm pretty sure. My memory from a couple of years ago isn't great, but yeah, The Stand was the second book that I read from Stephen King. As I said, these books are interchangeable. 2 books that I got together as a Christmas present were Carrie and The Shining. So these are the 2 books that I most likely read following. I mean, maybe I read them before The Stand, I can't quite remember. Around about this time I read Carrie and The Shining for the first time, so they're my 3rd and 4th books. If you didn't watch my last video, I'm not quite sure when this video is going up, but essentially I filmed a video about 20 books that I want to read before I turn 20, and Carrie and The Shining are on there because they're 2 books that I really want to reread. And I have at this point already reread Carrie, so that's going to be in my February wrap up, so definitely go and check that out when it comes out. And then I'm also hoping to reread The Shining at some point. The next book is one of my favourite editions of Stephen King's books that I own because I believe it's one of the original hardbacks. I picked this up in a secondhand bookshop or a charity shop, I can't quite remember, in the US when I went to go and visit my family over there, and that is Pet Sematary, and this cover is just so cool. Like, it's so 80s retro, and even if you look at the back, it's gone slightly yellow, which I just think is really very cool. Especially, I feel like Stephen King books look particularly great when they are sort of these old beaten up versions, especially ones like Pet Sematary and The Shining and Carrie, which came out obviously in the 70s and the 80s, so it really fits that sort of vibe. I did enjoy Pet Sematary. This is another one that I want to at some point reread, but I'm thinking of saving it for October, because that's probably the best time to read books like these. The next book on my list is another beautiful hardback. It's not quite as nice and retro as Pet Sematary, but this is another one that I got in a secondhand bookshop, and that is The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, which again is another book. There's quite a few of his books that I want to reread because I think since reading more of his work, I think it'd be more interesting to go back and reread some of them. This is a relatively short book for Stephen King, and it's a lot to do with the atmosphere. If I read this in a particular setting when it's dark, potentially October as well, then I feel like I'd get more out of this than I did the first time around. So I definitely want to pick that up again. But yeah, that's another one that I read. So we're up to 6 books now. So now we've come to a book that I don't actually have physically with me, and that's because since moving, in order to save space, I decided to leave some of my least favourite Stephen King books at home. I mean, in general, I think about half of my books have been left at my parents' house. So this one I haven't got with me, and I think anyone that's read this and has read The Shining will agree it's not the best Stephen King book in the world. It was slightly disappointing. I mean, I really enjoyed it. If it was a standalone, I think it would have been a lot better, but as a follow-up to The Shining, not that great. But that is, if you haven't guessed yet, that is Doctor Sleep, which essentially follows Danny, who is the kid in The Shining, and it follows him when he is older. And I thought it was really interesting. I liked the introduction of new characters. I liked the fact that he was older and we could see sort of what happened to him based on all the trauma he'd experienced as a young child. Now we're going back to the big books. I mean, Doctor Sleep is like 500 pages, but this one isn't massive in comparison to some other Stephen King books. This one is still like between 600 and 700 pages, and that is Sleeping Beauties. This book was written in collaboration with his son, Owen King, so I believe he's got 2 sons, and both of them are authors, or at least have written work. So obviously Owen King wrote this along with Stephen King. I also believe that they wrote a collection of short stories. Was it The Bazaar of Bad Dreams or something, which I haven't read yet. And he's also got another son called Joe Hill, who has written a couple of books that I find interesting. Or at least I haven't read any of his work yet, but I'd like to get my hands on it at some point. I really enjoyed this book because it was about a virus outbreak, which, sitting here now, obviously we're like, yep, that happens. That's a realistic thing. The way that the things that happen to people due to this virus is definitely not the same as what happens in the real world when you get a virus. But it's really interesting. Typical Stephen King, take something that seems sort of within our reach and then change it a lot so that it's just completely unrealistic. Or maybe not completely unrealistic, but definitely a lot more unrealistic. But it was really interesting. I think considering that it's 2 different authors, I always wonder how can you make that sort of vibe. But I think it worked really well. I think it gelled. But I did read this a while ago, so don't hang me up on it. The next book is one of my beloved hardbacks that I bought when it had basically just come out, so that means for me spending a lot of money. It is The Institute, and luckily I really enjoyed this book, and the more science route that he's gone down in this book is really interesting. It was not quite fully fledged sci-fi, but it's got feels of being sort of sci-fi, and it also goes down the route of children having abnormal powers such as telekinesis. That's one of my favourite books when it comes to aesthetics, because I just absolutely love the look of hardbacks. I prefer reading from paperbacks, but I definitely prefer the look of hardbacks most of the time. I've got a couple of books that aren't actually on my list, but which I know I've read, and one of them I definitely read, I'm almost certain I read before the Institute, and that is Revival, and I really want to reread this book because I don't remember much about it. I sort of remember vaguely what it's about. It's the sort of thing where I have an idea of what it's about, but I couldn't really explain it properly, so therefore I really want to go back and read it. It's also not the longest book in the world, it's just under 400 pages, I think. So yeah, that's one of the ones that I haven't got on my Goodreads, which makes it difficult because I can't actually count how many Stephen King books I've read, because I know there's some I've got at home where my parents live that I have not been able to add to the list because I just forget that they're there, even though I know I've read them. So this is another hardback, a beautiful one that I got as a birthday present, I believe, from my brother, back when I turned 17, I think. And that is this beautiful book, The Outsider. Again, this is another book that at some point in the future I will reread it. I'm not prioritising it, but I really, every time I look at these books, I'm just like, I want to reread them, but I don't have time to reread everything, especially if it's like 15 Stephen King books. But this is essentially half supernatural, half crime thriller sort of thing, and I really enjoyed it at the time. I took this on holiday with me. I don't know why I tried to take a big hardback with me on holiday, but I did that, and luckily I didn't completely damage it, which is really good, and I enjoyed it. This is another book that I decided to leave at home, and that is Dolores Claiborne. I don't have anything in particular against the story of Dolores Claiborne, it just wasn't my favourite. That's sitting at home with my parents, but at the time I enjoyed it, but I feel like it's one of the ones where I could probably just watch the film. I haven't seen the film yet. I really do want to see the film because I really enjoy Kathy Bates's acting, and I know she was in Misery as well, so I should probably watch both of those films. But I feel like it's one of the Stephen King books that you could probably just get away with watching the film. Speaking of Kathy Bates and the films that she's been in, the next book is Misery, and this is a great book. This is just a really awesome thriller. It's one of those ones where you can 100% see why it's become such a classic and why everyone loves it and why it's one of Stephen King's most loved books. It's so great. And I'm gonna leave it at that. Misery. It's a great book. I love this edition. I got this for my birthday last year. It's great. Here's another book that I have read but is still sitting at home, and that is Under the Dome. This is another book that I got for my birthday last year. It is about this thick, it's massive, and it's more of a sci-fi kind of book. It's about a town that gets essentially trapped under a dome. If you've ever watched the Simpsons movie, then it's like that, which I found really hilarious because I watched the Simpsons movie before I watched Under the Dome, and to see the parallels between that, it was really funny. It's a good book. It's not my favourite Stephen King book at all. The next book is Cujo, which is another one that I've left with my parents, and I don't know why I didn't bring it with me because actually I did really enjoy it. I don't think my rating was as high for it, but I still really enjoyed it, and I think it's just one of those cult classics. It's the same as Carrie, really great concept. It's become a cult classic. Cujo is great. The next book is another book that I haven't got with me, and this time it's because I borrowed it from a library, and that is Salem's Lot, and I would like to at some point get my hands on Salem's Lot. I would at some point in my life like to have all of Stephen King's works. I read Salem's Lot when I was in England, and I borrowed it from the library, and again it was enjoyable. It wasn't my favourite, but I really liked it. The next book is a book that I do have with me, and that is not this one. That is On Writing a Craft of the Memoir, which is the only non-fiction book that I've read by Stephen King. I talked about this one in my January wrap-up, so go and check that video out. I'll leave it linked somewhere. This was really interesting, especially as someone that's read a handful of his books. It was nice to read this and then hear about where he was in his life when he was writing them, where he maybe got the inspiration from, and also his tips and tricks to how to write creatively. I'm not a creative writer, I don't do it. I like the idea of doing it, but I don't really do it. But it was just still really interesting to read. So if you want to hear more about that, just go and check out my January wrap-up. They were all the Stephen King books that I have read thus far. As I said, I would like to do more of these kind of videos about Stephen King's books, so I didn't touch upon his books that long in this video. But if you want to hear more about a particular book, then definitely put it in the comments or send me an Instagram DM. If you want some sort of topic, like my favourites or my least favourites, or categorising his books in some way. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and make sure to click the subscribe button and the bell button so that you get notifications when I upload my next video. And I will see you in my next video.